الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Alhamdulillah, after a very long break, right, it's almost 2 months now I think, we took a break for Ramadan, but I think our final class was a couple of weeks before Ramadan started, and so we're resuming today. So this is technically lesson 7 of the Tafseer of Surah An-Nisa. In our last lesson, we began to look at the verse relating to inheritance. So chapter 4, verse 11. And because it's been so long, I think it will be good just to have a quick overview of what we covered in the last lesson, right? So we'll do that first, and then inshallah we will proceed with today's lesson. But inshallah, I think we'll begin by listening to the recitation, inshallah, verses 11 and 12, inshallah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يوصيكم الله في أولادكم للذكر مثل حظ الأنثيين فإن كن نساء فوق 2 فلهن ثلثا ما ترك وإن كانت واحدة فلها النصف ولأبويه لكل واحد منهما السدس مما ترك إن كان له ولد فإن لم يكن له ولد وورثه أبواه فلأمه الثلث فإن كان له إخوة فلأمه السدس من بعد وصية يوصي بها أو دين. آباؤكم وأبناؤكم لا تدرون أيهم أقرب لكم نفعا فريضة من الله إن الله كان عليما حكيما. ولكم نصف ما ترك أزواجكم إن لم يكن لهن ولد فإن كان لهن ولد فلكم الربع مما تركن من بعد وصية يوصين بها أو دين ولهن الربع مما تركتم إن لم يكن لكم ولد فإن كان لكم ولد فلهن الثمن مما تركتم من بعد وصية توصون بها أو دين. وإن كان رجل يورث كلالة أو امرأة وله أخ أو أخت فلكل واحد منهما السدس فإن كانوا أكثر من ذلك فهم شركاء في الثلث من بعد وصية يوصى بها أو دين غير مضار وصية من الله والله عليم حليم.
So as you can see, these two verses lay down the foundations of the system of inheritance in our religion. Inheritance in Arabic known as fara'id or mirath or mawarith, the various different terms that are used. In the last lesson, I won't be repeating everything we mentioned, but we spoke about the virtues of learning this science and this knowledge and its importance. And we mentioned the various narrations relating to that from the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba. Then we began to, we have an overlook over the main ways of inheriting. What are the causes of, or the asbab of inheritance? So we spoke about how you can inherit due to lineage, you can inherit also due to marriage, and you can inherit due to emancipation or being freed as a slave. Then we spoke about the fractions. As you can see in these two verses, you hear a lot of fractions. Nisf, rubu', thumun, thuluthan, thulutha, thuluth, sudus. These are all fractions. And the fractions, the main fractions that are mentioned in these two verses, there are 6. Right, 6. 6 major fractions that are mentioned when it comes to inheritance. All you have to remember, the most important 2 fractions you have to remember, we said were a half and 2/3. Good. Yeah? Just remember those 2, a half and 2/3. Now with the half, there are 2 that come after. So a half, if you divide that into 2, you get a quarter. If you divide a quarter into 2, you get an eighth. So that's half. We've dealt with 3 now. Now the other 3, so we said you have a thuluthan, 2/3. Half of 2/3 is obviously 1/3, and half of 1/3 is a 1/6. Right, so these are the 6 major fractions that you have to remember. Now, who inherits what? This is the discussion now that we went over last week. Not last week, the last lesson. And I gave everybody that chart, okay? So I can see one person with it, right? But you'll find it on my Telegram channel, inshallah, if you want it. But we broke it down. So for example, with regards to a half, who amongst the people inherit a half? And we said there are 5 people that inherit, that can inherit a half of the estate. Bint, meaning a daughter, or the daughter of a son, a full sister, etc. And so we broke that all down. As for a ruba', a quarter, then we spoke about who can inherit a quarter, right? Such as a husband, for example. Then we went thumun, we looked at thumun, who can inherit a thumun, an eighth, wife, okay? And a thuluthan, now moving on to thuluthan, who can inherit 2/3, we spoke about that in some detail. And then obviously the others as well, right? All of that is mentioned in that chart. So in that chart, it has a breakdown of who inherits what. These people that inherit these fara'id are known as ashab al-furud. Ashab al-furud, people who inherit a fard. What we mean by fard here is a specific share. A specific share. Right? So it's important to note that in Islamic law, as we mentioned before, when it comes to inheritance, the person who's about to write his will, he can't just say, well, I want my son to inherit all of my wealth and I want my cousin to inherit this amount. No, this is all, it's faridatan min Allah. It's been declared by Allah. Right? It's been declared by Allah. So you must give each person their due share, as has been stated in these 2 verses. This is not open to discussion. This is not a matter of choice for you. Right? So Ashabul Furud, they are entitled to that particular share, right? According to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not for the person to decide. Obviously a person can rescind their share if they want to give their share to somebody else, or, that's not a problem, okay? There's detail to that, but in principle that's fine. And then you have another type of way of inheriting, and this is known as ta'asib. Ta'asib, and the people who inherit by ta'asib, they are known as the asaba, plural of the term asib. And an asib is basically, these are what we call residual heirs. These are the people that essentially take whatever remains after the Ashabul Furud take their share. So if we look to the inheritance table, you'll see the wife can get a quarter or an eighth, the husband can get a half or a quarter, depending on the circumstances. The father can get a sixth, or he can even inherit via ta'asib as well. You have all these people. And then you'll notice there are people there, for example, son. Notice how a son is not from Ashabul Furud. He doesn't take a fixed share. So he doesn't take a half, he doesn't take a quarter. He inherits via ta'asib. So basically, after the mother takes her share, the father takes his share if he is alive. If there's a daughter, the daughter takes her share, for example, right? Actually, don't mention the daughter here in this case. For example, if the wife and the husband take their share and the mother take their share, and then you have a son that's left, the son will take what is left. Right? He inherits via ta'asib. So therefore the son's inheritance can vary. Sometimes he can take it all. Sometimes he can take a small amount. Sometimes he can take a large amount. It really depends on the circumstance. So when it comes to ta'asib, residual inheritance, residual meaning what's left over, like residue, yeah? Residual. In terms of what's left over, that's how the son inherits. He inherits by ta'asib. Now obviously when it comes to ta'asib, there's further detail. There are different forms of ta'asib, but we're not going to go into that much detail. So it's important to note that this is a tafseer class, it's not a fiqh class. And so we're not going to study the laws of inheritance as you would traditionally study in a fiqh class, because that would actually take a number of weeks. So we're just going to look at the ayah itself, or the ayat themselves, and cover the major points that are mentioned in the ayah. So inshallah it will give you a good overview of inheritance, but you won't have a complete understanding. If you want a complete understanding of inheritance, you have to study it properly, right? Like from a book of fiqh or a particular text covering inheritance. And for those who want to study it in some detail, I recommend for those who read Arabic to read Sheikh Muhammad Ali al-Sabuni's book, just called Al-Mawarith. Right, this is a very good, it's a fairly small book, right? But it's a very, very comprehensive and easy to understand text. Again, Al-Mawarith fi Sharia al-Islamiyya by Sheikh Muhammad Ali al-Sabuni. And then after you read a text like this and study a text like this, then you could go into a matan if you want to study like a poem, like a rahabiyya, or study from a traditional matan in fiqh, depending on the madhab that you study. Right, so that's essentially what we covered in the, and then we looked at another way of breaking down inheritance in terms of the heirs. So we said, for example, the Ashab al-Furud, those who take a fixed share, or the main people that inherit from the men, we said there are 10, and the main people that inherit from women are of seven groups of people. And I think that's the point where we stopped. Right, so inshallah, let's break down the ayah bit by bit, inshallah ta'ala. Firstly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in verse 11, يُوصِيكُمُ اللَّهُ فِي أَوْلَادِكُمْ لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ. Allah commands you regarding your children. The share of the male will be twice that of the female. Now firstly, يُوصِيكُمُ اللَّهُ فِي أَوْلَادِكُمْ. Allah commands you with regards to your children, meaning with regards to inheritance. Allah is the one who is commanding you how to pass on your inheritance to your children. Now, what does this indicate? This indicates that, number one, it is not a matter of decision for the parents to decide how their children inherit. Right? It is a matter for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because Allah knows best what is best for your children. This is an important point. Secondly, as Ibn Kathir rahimahullah, he mentions, and this is a very nice fa'idah that he extracted from this verse, and he mentions, وَقَدْ اسْتَنْبَطَ بَعْضُ الْأَذْكِيَاءِ. He said some intelligent scholars have extracted from this verse that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala arhamu bi khalqihi min al-walid bi waladihi. That Allah is more merciful to His creation than a parent is to his child. Subhanallah. Allah is more merciful to His creation than a parent is to his child. Why? حَيْثُ أَوْصَى الْوَالِدَيْنِ بِأَوْلَادِهِمْ. Since Allah instructed the parents how to take care of their children. Think about this. Imagine I went up to a parent and I said, look, this is how you should be looking after your child. Well, the parent will turn around and say, who are you to tell me how to look after my child? I know my child better than anybody else, isn't it? And parents always find it difficult to, and it's a very odd thing, to advise another parent with regards to their children, right? Because you don't want to step on their toes. You look, each parent knows best what is for their child, right? So that's why you have to be careful when giving advice to other parents. Say, look, this is how you should be bringing up your children. A lot of people get offended. Like, I know my children best, right? But Allah is saying, look, Allah is more merciful to your children than you can ever be as parents. So that's why يُوصِيكُمُ اللَّهُ فِي أَوْلَادِكُمْ. Allah commands you with regards to your children. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is well known, this is also based upon the famous hadith, as you probably know, the famous hadith where the Prophet was walking with a group of companions, and there was this woman with her child. And when she found her child, she was looking for her child. When she found her child, that motherly instinct overtook her, and she began to breastfeed the child out of compassion for the child. And then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she was next to this fire, sitting next to this fire, and he said, "Atarawna hadhihi tarihata waladiha, fi an-nar." Do you think this woman would ever throw her child into that fire? And the Sahaba, they said, La ya Rasulullah. Clearly not. This woman is very compassionate and merciful to her child. We've just seen that. And she wouldn't do such a thing. فَوَاللَّهِ لَاللَّهُ أَرْحَمُ بِعِبَادِهِ مِنْ هَذِهِ بِوَلَدِهَا. By Allah, Allah is more merciful to His servants than this woman is to her child. Subhanallah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is more merciful than a mother is to a child, and than a child is to their own parent. And this is very important to remember, right? That especially if you lose a child or you lose a parent, don't think that you are leaving their soul to someone who is less merciful than you, right? In fact, that's why Sufyan al-Thawri, he even said that I wouldn't even want my own parent to be my judge on the Day of Judgment. Subhanallah. Right? You would think if anyone is merciful, it will be your mother or your father on the Day of Judgment. He said, no, I don't even want my parents to judge me on the Day of Judgment. I want Allah to judge me. Right? Because Allah's mercy is greater. Right? The mercy of Allah cannot be compared to the mercy of any human being. So يُوصِيكُمُ اللَّهُ فِي أَوْلَادِكُمْ لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ. The male will, the share of the male will be twice that of the female. Now here, an important point to note here, the share of the male will be twice that of the male. So here, Allah starts off the ayah not by really speaking about Ashab al-Furud. This is here, He is talking about the Asaba, the residual heirs. So notice in this ayah, Allah doesn't speak about fractions. Although He mentions twice as much, right? مثل حظ الأنثيين, like a male will have twice the share of the female. What context is this? This is in the context if a person was to die and they left behind sons and daughters, right? So if you look to the table, notice when it comes to son, remember son doesn't have a fixed share. He is not from Ashab al-Furud, right? He doesn't take a fixed share. He's a residual heir. A daughter, on the other hand, notice how a daughter is from Ashab al-Furud. She can either take a half, or if there are more than one daughter, meaning 2 or more daughters, then they take thuluthan, they take 2/3, isn't it? However, the daughter can inherit via ta'asib. And when is that? If she has a brother. Right? If she has a brother. So meaning the daughter or the daughters will only inherit a half or 2/3 if they don't have any brothers. So if a man died and he left behind like a wife and he left behind some daughters, the daughters will take, 2/3, right? And the wife will take an 1/8, right? The rest will go elsewhere. We'll discuss, that's another discussion. However, if a man died and he left behind, for example, a wife, and he left behind daughters and sons, the wife in this situation will take thumun. Why will she take an 1/8? Because the husband that died, he has heirs, descending heirs, right? Furu', right? And who are they? Sons and daughters. So in this case, they take whatever remains. So the wife will take the 1/8, and the remaining amount, which is the 7/8, will be split between the sons and the daughters, but the sons will have twice the share of the daughters. Right? And that's why if you see in the diagram, if you notice it has son and daughter, and then between it has the T. The T indicates ta'asib. The T indicates ta'asib. And that's why he says, sons inherit with daughters, males inherit double the female. This is known as ta'asib by others, ta'asib bil ghayr. Now, how do we practically figure this out? Right, when we say twice the share of a girl, let's just give some examples how to figure this out. So normally, when you're doing inheritance and you work out inheritance, obviously you're going to work in fractions. There are different ways you can do it. There are different methods in terms of calculating exactly how many shares you get. Normally, what we do, this is one of the ways that you divide the mas'ala, or the scenario, we would just call it mas'ala, divide the mas'ala into ashum, into particular shares, meaning how many shares will there be, and how do you distribute those shares amongst the heirs. So now we need to understand. So just to make it really easy, imagine a man died and he left behind just daughters and sons, right? No wife in the picture. A man died and he left behind, let's just say let's start off with 2 sons and a daughter. A man died and he left behind 2 sons and a daughter. لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ. So the male should have twice the share of the female. Now, how many shares are we going to be dealing with? The basic procedure to do, just to make it easy, take the number of males that we have. Remember, 2 males and 1 female. 2 males and 1 female. Take the males, right? Double that number. So 2 times 2 equals 4. So you have 4 shares there, and you have 1 female. So you just count that 1 as 1. So in total, there are 5 shares. That's what you're going to be dealing with, right? 5 shares. Because there are 2 males. With the males you multiply by 2. Yeah? With the males you multiply by 2. So that means you have 4. And you have 1 female. So there are 5 ashum. There are 5 shares. لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ. Each male will have twice the share of the female. So one male will have 2/5. The other male will have 2/5. And the female will have 1/5. Yeah? And that way, the dhakar, the male, inherits twice the share of the female. Okay? That's how you figure out the male having twice the share of the female. And remember, this applies to those who inherit via ta'asib. Obviously, if they're from Ashab al-Furud, the concept of لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيْنِ doesn't apply. Right? So for example, if if a man dies leaving behind a wife and leaving behind a father, so you have a male and a female, a man dies leaving behind a wife and he leaves a father. Right? So we don't apply the rule, oh, because the father's a male and the wife is a female, the male gets double of the female. That's not applied here, because these people are ashab al-furud. Right? The father can also inherit via ta'asib as well, by the way. But here, when we're talking about male having twice the share of females, this is really between the people who inherit via ta'asib, like sons and daughters and brothers and sisters. Okay? Another scenario, imagine we have 3 sons and 2 daughters. Right? We have 3 sons and 2 daughters. How many total shares are we going to deal with? 8, yeah. Because 3 sons, you multiply that by 2, that leaves you with 6, and 2 daughters, so that's 8. Yeah? 8 in total. How much does each son get? 2 over 8. You could break that down further, isn't it? 2 over 8, you break that down into a quarter. That's the same. That's the lowest denomination. So each son will get a quarter, right? And the daughter, and each daughter will get 1/8. Yeah? Right. Right. So that's a basic way of understanding how the male receives twice the share of the female. Now, it's very interesting that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins the verse by saying, Yusikumullahu fi awladikum. It is Allah who advises you with regards to your children. Because this has become a very contentious point in this day and age, isn't it? Why is it that the male has to inherit twice the share of the female? In the age of, equality and what have you, surely they should inherit the same. Allah says, look, yusikumullah. It's Allah who's telling you how to divide your inheritance. Right? It's not down to anybody else. So what is the wisdom, firstly, in the fact that the male inherits twice the share of the female in this circumstance? When it comes to between like brothers and sisters, sons and daughters and brothers and sisters. Firstly, a woman is financially taken care of by her guardian. Right? She's taken care of. So if you're taken care of, if your finances are being dealt with by somebody else, you don't really need as much as the man. Because the man, who takes care of the man? Nobody. He has to take care of himself. So a woman under Islamic law is taken care of financially by her guardian. Her guardian might be her father or her husband. She doesn't have that financial responsibility. Secondly, and that's is kind of connected, but a woman, in addition to being taken care of, she has no financial obligation to take care of anybody. All right? Even her children. That responsibility falls upon the father. Right? That responsibility falls upon the father. So she has no financial obligations, but the man has the financial obligations. Thirdly, the financial obligations of men are far more than a woman's. Right? The man has to provide, number one, he has to give a mahar. Does a woman give a mahar, a marriage dowry? No, a woman doesn't give a mahar. The man has to provide income. The man has to provide shelter and food and accommodation. A woman doesn't have to contribute to that. A man has to provide for the children. A woman doesn't have to provide for the children, etc. So these are 3 important points that we must remember. right, that help us understand the wisdom behind why the male will, is entitled to more of the inheritance than the woman when it comes to ta'asib, residual inheritance. But if you look back to what we mentioned about Ashab al-Furud, if you look at Ashab al-Furud, people who take the fixed shares, sometimes a woman can actually inherit more than a man. Right? So for example, imagine a woman dies, right? A woman dies, leaving behind a daughter, a husband, and, for example, an uncle, right? So a paternal uncle, meaning her dad's brother. So, who gets what here in this case? So a woman dies, if you look at the chart, okay, a woman dies and she leaves behind a daughter. How much does the daughter get? She gets a half. Yeah? How much does the husband get? A quarter. Right? Which is obviously, right, less than a half. Right? So the husband will get less than the daughter. The uncle, meaning her dad's brother, al-am, yeah, akhul ab, he will inherit via ta'asib. He's a residual heir. So how much will he get? A quarter. What's left over, basically. Right? So the uncle will get a quarter, the father will get a quarter, but the daughter will get a half. So she gets more. Right? She gets more than the husband, and she gets more than the uncle. And there are other scenarios. There are many other examples we can give that show that actually under certain circumstances, right, the girl can inherit, a female can inherit more than a man. That point is often overlooked, right? But that's not important. I mean, that's not to say that, oh, okay, therefore, what it shows you is that this is number one, it's a complex system, right? All according to the hikmah and the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not just about equality, right? And in fact, equality in every aspect of life indicates a lack of knowledge, because people's circumstances are different. People's circumstances are different, and these differences can dictate different treatment. And we acknowledge this even in Western society, where they preach, where equality is preached. They acknowledge that there are certain circumstances where equality isn't appropriate, and that's why there's this argument for there's equity, like fairness, right? And equality. I mean, maybe if we were to probably be more honest, I mean, equity is probably preached more than equality per se. But people simplify, especially when it comes to like wages. Right? There should be equality in wages, for example, they say. Right? But in other areas, for example, when it comes to financial assistance and care, there is no equality. If you're disabled, if you're elderly, or if you're really young, you actually have more financial support from the government than people who don't fall into those categories. So there isn't any equality in those circumstances. Right. So للذكر مثل حظ الأنثيين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he then says, فإن كن نساء فوق اثنتين فلهن ثلثا ما ترك. If you leave only 2 or more females, their share is 2/3 of the estate. فإن كن نساء, meaning if the mutawaffa, if the person who dies, leaving behind 2 or more daughters, right? 2 or more daughters, right? And also, in addition to this, if he leaves behind, 2 or more sisters as well, فَإِن كُنَّ نِسَاءً, so this nisa applies to daughters as well as full sisters. If there's 2 or more, then they will have ثلثان. Right? ثلثا ما ترك. The noon is dropped here due to idafa. Right? It's mudaf. So it's originally ثلثاني, but the noon is dropped due to idafa for those who know some basic Arabic grammar. فلهن ثلثا ما ترك. They share the 2/3 of the estate. So these women are from ashab al-furud or from the asaba. Ashab al-furud. Yeah, they're ashab al-furud. Yeah, this is a fixed share. Right? فإن كن نساء فوق اثنتين فلهن ثلثا ما ترك. وإن كانت واحدة. However, if she is only one, meaning if there's only one that is left behind, meaning one daughter, right? فَلَهَا النِّصْفِ. Then she will, her share will be 1/2. Right? So when it comes to daughters, there are 2 scenarios. And you can see that in the table. When it comes to daughters, there are 2 scenarios, as well as full sister on the right-hand side. You will see that the full sister can also inherit via ta'asib as well. Right? The daughter can inherit via ta'asib. But when it comes to specific fard or specific fractions, there are 2 scenarios. It says here, if no sharing. What does it mean, if no sharing? Meaning if she's not sharing with another sister, so she is alone. Or there is, if no asib. Who is the asib to the daughter? Her brother. Yeah. So if she doesn't have a brother, and there are no other sisters, she inherits half. If she has another sister, then they will have 2/3. Okay, if she has a brother, then what? She gets half of what the brother gets. Yeah, لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ. Okay, good. Right. There's another qira'ah actually, وَإِن كَانَتْ وَاحِدَةٌ. Right? But it's the same meaning. And in wujidat wahida, meaning if there was basically one. Which is the qira'ah of Nafi'. Yeah. وَلِأَبَوَيْهِ لِكُلِّ وَاحِدٍ مِّنْهُمَا السُّدُسُ مِمَّا تَرَكَ إِن كَانَ لَهُ وَلَدٌ. Now, moving on to the abawain, to the 2 parents. وَلِأَبَوَيْهِ. Each parent is entitled to 1/6, a sudus. If you leave offspring, mimma tarak, meaning from what you've left, in terms of sudus of your estate. In kana lahu walad, if he had a child. So if we look to the parents in the mother and the father in the table, you can see that there are a number of circumstances. Right? You can see, for example, let's start with the easier is just to look at the mother, right? So there's one circumstance where she will inherit a third, and another circumstance where thuluth, another circumstance where she will inherit sudus, a 1/6. When does she inherit a third? Well, there's no descendant heir. Right? There's no descendant heir. Meaning a person dies leaving behind a mother but has no children. So the person who died has no children, but the person left a mother. In that situation, the mother, she is from ashab al-furud, and so she is entitled to thuluth, 1/3. In the presence of descendant heirs, but if a person died leaving behind children, then in that situation the mother would inherit less, right? Because now more has to go to the children, isn't it? So she only inherits a 1/6, sudus. Or multiple siblings. Multiple siblings meaning if the person died leaving behind a brother and sister, right? Then in that situation she will also inherit slightly less, the mother that is. Right? So وَلِأَبَوَيْهِ لِكُلِّ وَاحِدٍ مِّنْهُمَا. And for the parents, each one, meaning the father and the mother, they're both entitled to a sudus, right? إن كان له ولد. إن كان له يعني المتوفى, the one who passed away. فإن لم يكن له ولد وورثه أبواه فلأمه الثلث. But if you are childless, meaning the one who passed away, died, leaving behind no children, and your parents are the only heirs. Okay? What time is Maghrib today? 16. Okay. فإن لم يكن له ولد وورثه أبواه. But if you are childless and your parents are the only heirs, فلأمه الثلث. So again, you go, and we covered that. All right. So in the situation where there are no descendant heirs, then they will receive a third. فلأمه الثلث. The mother, notice here, the mother is being highlighted here. Why is the mother being highlighted here only and not the abawain, not the fathers, not the father? Because he's an asib. Good. In this situation, he takes what's rest. Right? So if you look to the father, in this case, the father has a number of scenarios. So he can take a sudus, he can take a sixth, right? Or he can take a sudus and plus ta'asib. But he can also inherit via ta'asib, meaning he takes absolutely everything that remains. And this is when there is no descendant heir at all. Right? No descendant heir at all. So that would mean, so if a man died and he only left behind his parents, his mother will take thuluth, his mother will take a third, and the father will take the rest, the 2/3. Yeah. So, فَإِن لَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ وَلَدْ وَوَرِثَهُ أَبَوَاهُ فَلِأُمِّهِ الثُّلُث. Allah hasn't explicitly mentioned what the ab will get, but that's understood. It's implied, isn't it? So we say فَلِأُمِّهِ الثُّلُث, that means the ab will take thuluthan. That means the father will take 2/3. فَإِن كَانَ لَهُ إِخْوَةٌ فَلِأُمِّهِ السُّدُسُ. We've mentioned this as well. But if you leave siblings, meaning if the person who died, leaving behind brothers and sisters and a mother, right? Then your mother will receive 1/6, right? And the brothers and the sisters will inherit via ta'asib, لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ. Right. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, مِن بَعْدِ وَصِيَّةٍ يُوصِي بِهَا أَوْ دَيْنٍ. After the fulfillment of bequests and debts. So this is the point where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stops speaking about the Ashab al-Furud in this ayah. In the next ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will speak about other Ashab al-Furud as well. But here Allah says, مِن بَعْدِ وَصِيَّةٍ يُوصِي بِهَا أَوْ دَيْنٍ. After the fulfillment of bequests and debts. Meaning, the Ashab al-Furud will take their share after debts have been cleared and the bequests have been dealt with. So what does this mean? When a person dies, before his wealth, his estate, his tariqah is passed on to his waratha, is passed on to his heirs, there are 3 things that have to be taken care of. The first important thing is what? Before debts? Janaza. Yeah? Kafan and janaza. Okay, inshallah. We'll stop there, inshallah, and we will conclude shortly after Salat al-Maghrib, inshallah. Jazakumullah.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah, wa ba'd, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So inshallah we'll continue with today's class. So we've looked at the Ashab al-Furud, the major Ashab al-Furud, those who inherit with fixed shares. We've briefly spoken about the Asaba. Again, this is a quick overlook, right? As I said, if you want to really go into detail, you need to dedicate a specific class just to learn the ahkam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says towards the end of the verse, min ba'di wasiyatin yusi biha aw dayn, after the fulfillment of bequests and debts. And so the last point we mentioned, we said that when someone dies, before their tarika, their estate, meaning the wealth that they've left behind, is distributed to the waratha, you have to take care of three things. Number one, the janaza costs, and then you take care of any duyun, any debts. So if a person passed away and he owed money to other people, their rights precede the rights of the waratha, of those who inherit. And then after that, you take care of the wasiyah, the bequest, if he bequeathed any wealth. What is the wasiyah? So the wasiyah is where you write in your will, your final testament, what we call today your will, your final will. In your will, you can write down if you want to give some of your wealth away to other than the waratha, other than your heirs, so other than the Ashab al-Furud and the Asaba. Right? So, for example, you want to donate some of your money to a masjid or as waqf. So you say, and you write in your will, I want, for example, a tenth of my estate to go to a particular masjid as waqf, as an endowment. Or I want my a tenth of my wealth, or a third even, and a third is quite a lot. وَالثُّلُثُ كَثِيرٌ, as Rasulullah said, meaning you can dedicate up to 1/3 of your wealth to any cause that you like. It could be for a charity, building a masjid, building a madrasa, or giving it to a far distant relative. I say far distant relative because you can't say in your will, I want all of my money to go to my son. That's not for you to decide, that's for Allah to decide. Ashab al-Furud and the Asaba, they will get what is determined by the Quran and the Sunnah. That's why Rasulullah said, Inna Allah a'ta kulla dhi haqqin haqqahu, fala wasiyyata liwarithin. Allah has given everyone their due share. Meaning the Ashab al-Furud and the Asaba, He's given them their fixed share. Fala wasiyyata liwarith. So you cannot write in your will, I want to give all of my wealth to my daughter and nothing goes to my wife, for example. You can't do that. Right? Now obviously, because this, don't get me wrong here, because we live in for example, a non-Muslim country where the laws of inheritance aren't according to Islamic law, you might want to write in your will that I want my son and my daughter to have my wealth, my wife to have, a quarter, right? Or an eighth, right? Depending on the circumstance. Meaning, as long as it's in accordance to the Sharia, you could do that. That's not a problem. You could do that, right? But you also take into consideration that the ahkam of your, the final circumstances might actually be different to what you have written in your will. So for example, you might have written in your will, say you write in your will 10 years before you die, I want my wife to have an eighth, and I want the rest to go to my children, which makes sense. That's shari'i wise, that's fine. But then what happens is your wife dies before you, right? And you forget to update your will. Right? So in your will it says your wife gets an eighth and your children get 7/8. And that's the problem now, isn't it? Because, your wife died before you. So that obviously can't work. So that's why, when you write your will, always update it. Just if someone dies in your family, that might affect the overall inheritance. Always try to update it, basically. Otherwise, you could just simply write in your will, I want my estate to be distributed according to Islamic law. Right? And obviously your offspring, your children, for example, if you have children or your family members, will distribute it according to Islamic law. So, as I said, when you die, your tariqah, your estate, before it's passed on to your heirs, you must you take care of 3 matters before it gets passed on to the waratha. Janazah costs, debts, and then if you have bequeathed any wealth, if there's a wasiyah, if you wrote in your will that you want to give some of your wealth away to a distant relative or to some Islamic cause or for a waqf of some sort, then you deal with that, and then whatever remains is given to the waratha. Whatever remains is distributed among the heirs. Okay? Now, notice the order I mentioned. I mentioned debts before waratha. Sorry, I mentioned debts before wasiyah, which makes sense, isn't it? If you owe someone money, that person is more entitled to your estate than if you wrote in your will, okay, I want a third of my money to go to a masjid. That's voluntary, isn't it? You don't have to do that. But do you have to pay back your creditors? Yes, you have to pay them back. That's wajib. It's not wajib for you to donate your money to a masjid. But if you look to the ayah, look what Allah says, min ba'di wasiyatin yusi biha aw dayn. What does Allah mention first? Wasiyah or dayn? Wasiyah. Min ba'di wasiyatin yusi biha aw dayn. Interesting. Allah mentions the wasiyah, the bequest, meaning what you write in your will, which is to go to a non-heir, that part of your wealth which is to go to a non-heir, like to a charity, for example. He mentions that before the dayn. Now, why is this the case? This is interesting. The scholars, they say that dayn is mu'akhar fil lafz but muqaddam fil ma'na. That the dayn, although is mentioned after the wasiyah, it comes before the wasiyah in preference, in priority. Why? Dayn is haqqun alayhi. A dayn, it's a right upon him. Wal wasiyata haqqun lahu. And the wasiyah is something that he is entitled to do, but it's not wajib for him. Right? So what is the wisdom in mentioning the wasiyah before the dayn? He says, Imam al-Razi rahimahullah, he says, وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ الْحِكْمَةَ فِي تَقْدِيمِ الْوَصِيَّةِ عَلَى الدَّيْنِ فِي اللَّفْظِ أَنَّ الْوَصِيَّةَ مال يؤخذ بغير عوض فكان إخراجها شاقا على الورثة. Look at the reasoning here. He said, wasiyah, if you think about the wasiyah is wealth, يؤخذ بغير عوض, meaning it's something which is given voluntarily. It's not, that you give in compensation. It's not like a debt. A debt is you borrow money and you give it back. It's a two-way thing, isn't it? You borrow money and you give it back. A wasiyah is something you give directly. It's like a gift, right? فَكَانَ إِخْرَاجُهَا شَاقًا عَلَى الْوَرَثَةِ. And so therefore, for the heirs, now the heirs are going to be dealing with the tariqah of with the estate of the deceased, right? Like the children, now they have all of this money, their father's money, for example, right? They have to look at his will, isn't it? When you look at the will, they'll say, okay, in his will it says he owes so and so this amount of money. Okay, let's give it, right? Because that's wajib. Oh, but he wanted to donate £30,000 to a masjid. He doesn't have to do that. Surely we're more entitled to that. Can you see how it's more difficult for the waratha to execute the will of their father if it's for a voluntary charitable cause. So فكان أداؤها مظنة للتفريط بخلاف الدين. So therefore the wasiyah is a situation where it is likely for there to be negligence, meaning the heirs, the waratha, are likely to be negligent when executing the will. Because who's going to know, isn't it? If he writes, if he wrote in his will before he dies, I want, £10,000, £30,000 to go to a masjid, no one needs to know about that. When it comes to debts, obviously the creditors will know, isn't it? They say, look, your father owed me some money, so, but with a wasiyah on the other hand, that's a private affair. It's very easy for the heirs to say amongst themselves, you know what, he didn't have to give that money, let's just keep it and split it between ourselves because we're in more need. Right? So that's a real case of dhulm and injustice that can take place. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَلِهَذَا السَّبَبْ قَدَّمَ اللَّهُ ذِكْرَ الْوَصِيَّةِ عَلَى ذِكْرِ الدَّيْنِ. So that's why Allah stressed the importance of the wasiyah. He mentioned it before the dain, not because it takes priority. No, the duyun, debts, take priority over the will, over the bequest. But it's an area of negligence and an area where people are likely to be unjust. And therefore Allah stresses it by mentioning before. Min ba'di wasiyatin yusi biha. In fact, Allah says min ba'di wasiyah. He didn't say just min ba'di wasiyatin aw dayn. No, min ba'di wasiyatin yusi biha. After a wasiyah that he himself has bequeathed. Emphasizing that, look, if he really left behind a bequest, meaning he wrote in his will that he wanted some of his money to go to this particular cause or to this particular person, that must be executed. It must be seen to. ثم أكد في الترغيب بإدخال. And so this is the wisdom why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned من بعد وصية يوصي بها أو دين. Now, are you obliged to write a wasiyah? Meaning, are you obliged to write in your wasiyah or to dedicate a part of your wealth to a non-heir? No, you're not required to Islamically. You're not required to Islamically. We'll take questions at the end, inshallah. Yeah? You're not required to Islamically, especially if, for example, look, if you're going to pass away and you think you don't have that much money, and your children are going to be poor, right? Just as the Prophet ﷺ said, for you to leave your waratha well off is better for them to be poor and begging other people, right? But if you're someone who Allah has blessed with wealth, and you're very wealthy, and your children are grown up, they have their own businesses, they're well off, they're well established, then of course, consider leaving an act of charity behind, isn't it? Sadaqah jariyah, that will benefit you in your grave and in the akhirah. Right? So everyone has their own circumstances. Everyone has their own circumstances. And so it's down to you to decide whether you would like to bequeath some wealth to a charitable cause or to an endowment or to a distant relative, meaning a non-heir that you were fond of, you were close to. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He then says, آباؤكم وأبناؤكم لا تدرون أيهم أقرب لكم نفعا. Now here in Mustafa Khattab's translation, he puts in the parentheses and the brackets, be fair to your parents and children, as you do not fully know who is more beneficial to you. Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions آباؤكم وأبناؤكم. This is a sentence which isn't explicitly complete. He just says your fathers and your sons and your children. Your parents and your children. That's what Imam al-Qurtubi rahimahullah, he says, and these are mubtada, yani this is the subject, and the predicate, the khabar, is mahdhuf. Taqdiruhu هم المقسوم عليهم وهم المعطون. Meaning, آباؤكم وأبناؤكم, these are the people that you have to give that will inherit your wealth, according to what the ayah has mentioned. Alright? So it's not establishing a new ruling, it's just saying, look, these are your fathers, meaning these are your parents and above, and your children and your descendants. This is what they will get, as mentioned in the ayah. Right? لا تدرون أيهم أقرب لكم نفعا. You don't know. You don't fully know who is more beneficial to you. Now, why mention this here? What does this mean? Now, if the laws of inheritance were left and they were left to our own decisions, people they will vary in the way that they give their inheritance, isn't it? Right? So if it was down to me and I was to write in my will, okay, who will get my inheritance? Okay? I don't want to offend any of my family members, I'm not going to say, right? But you have a mother, a wife, daughters, right? How would I split that? Very difficult, isn't it? Right? And subhanAllah, if you look amongst non-Muslims, right, this is an issue which tears families apart. Right? What will happen is usually, the lawyer will come, the one who will execute, or the attorney to execute the will, he will bring all the family members and they say, look, you're deceased, this is how they wanted their wealth to be distributed, right? So they wanted, one of their daughters to have all of the inheritance. The son gets nothing, the husband gets nothing, and it all goes to the daughter. Imagine the husband will tell her, I was like, what? I lived with this woman for all of my life and she didn't leave anything behind for me. And the son will say, he favored, my sister over me. Right? And, it can lead to so many problems. Now, why would someone give preference to one person over another? Because they might think, I was closer to that person, so let me give that person more than the another person. Or I like this person more than the other person, so I'll give them more. Right? Now, but remember, right? Relatives, yes, you enjoy their company in this life. Right? But really, you want your relatives to benefit you in your akhirah. You want your relatives to benefit you. Like, look, the Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا مَاتَ ibn Adam, if the son of Adam dies, انقطع عنه عمله, his deeds are just cut off, except from three, isn't it? And one of them is وَلَدٌ صَالِحٌ يَدْعُ لَهُ, a righteous child that makes dua for him. Your child will benefit you after you die, if they are sincere and they have a right understanding. We benefit each other in different ways. Like, for example, the father benefits the child when the child is young, isn't it? But the child benefits the father when the father becomes old. We all benefit each other in different ways, in different stages of life. The father can benefit the child in the afterlife. وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَاتَّبَعَتْهُمْ ذُرِّيَّتُهُمْ, like those who believe, we will join them with those who we will join them with their offspring in the afterlife. Allah will reunite the sons with this, so the son can take the father and to a higher rank in paradise, and the father can take the son, vice versa. Right? So when it comes to these alaqat and these relationships between family members, like, we don't know who will truly benefit us in this life and in the hereafter. We don't know. Are we going to be benefit our parents, or will our parents benefit us in the akhirah? Who's going to have a higher rank, you or your father? We don't know. Maybe that you will be. Maybe you will have the higher rank. Maybe you'll be the one who will take your father to paradise. Maybe it will be your father that will take you to paradise. Higher rank, that is. We don't know. So don't treat this matter of inheritance lightly and think, oh, I favored this person more in this dunya. This person was kinder to me in the dunya, so I will give him more. You don't know who will truly benefit you. Allah knows and you don't know. Wallahu ya'lamu wa antum la ta'lamun. Allah knows best and you don't know. So you don't know who will truly benefit you. Let Allah decide how your inheritance is to be distributed. This is the key point. And that's why the scholars, they discuss with regards to this ayah, when Allah is speaking about who will be more beneficial to you, is this relating to the dunya or the akhirah? And many scholars say is relating to the akhirah. Right? In the akhirah, meaning the son can benefit the father, or the father can benefit the son, or due to the dua of the son will benefit the father, etc. Right? Also, some say no, this is in relating to the dunya. We benefit each other in the dunya through our wealth. We don't know. Now normally, the fathers die before the son, isn't it? Right? So when the father dies, the son will inherit via ta'asib. He will become a residual heir. He takes everything after all of the ashab al-furud take their share. But you don't know. So in that case, the son benefits from the wealth of the father. But it could happen, and this happens many times. The son dies before the father. And so as a result, the father benefits from the wealth of the son. Right? And this is according to the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you don't know, we don't know who will benefit who. This is the point here. آباؤكم وأبناؤكم لا تدرون أيهم أقرب لكم نفعا فريضة من الله. This is a obligation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إن الله كان عليما حكيما. Surely Allah is all-knowing, all-wise. فريضة من الله. This is an obligation from Allah. It's not a matter for us to decide, as we said. إن الله أعطى كل ذي حق حقه. Allah has given every person their due share. فلا وصية لوارث. إن الله كان عليما حكيما. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is the all-knowing and the all-wise. And of course, these two names make perfect sense to mention at this stage. Inna Allah kana aliman. He's the all-knowing. So He knows who will benefit who. He knows who is in more need of the wealth than others. And He is Hakim. He is wise in His judgment. He doesn't just make it equal for everybody. He gives certain people a greater share than others in certain circumstances. Now, Inna Allah, notice here, Inna Allah kana aliman hakima. Kana is interesting because the word kana in the Arabic language means was. Right? And this is a Quranic feature. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about Himself, He often uses the term kana. And kana indicates past tense, as we said. So if you were to translate it literally, Allah was all-knowing, all-wise. So why does Allah speak about Himself in the past tense like this? Some scholars, they said, when it comes to ilm, knowledge is something which is gained for human beings through experience, right? Through learning. إِنَّمَا الْعِلْمُ بِالتَّعَلُّمِ. As Rasulullah said, knowledge comes through learning. It's a process. The knowledge of Allah isn't through a process. Allah doesn't have to learn. Allah doesn't have to observe to see what is best. He already knew before the matter even arose. كَانَ عَلِيمًا بِالْأَشْيَاءِ قَبْلَ خَلْقِهَا. Allah was aware of the realities of things before they were even created. Secondly, kana can mean, as Sibawayhi he says, kana can mean was walam yazal, and continues. So it's not connected to time, and He was and is. Lam yazal. Also, as some scholars say that when kana is used with regards to lafdhul jalala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, يتساوى ماضيها ومستقبلها. Yani the past, present and future are all the same to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, لأن الأشياء عند الله سبحانه وتعالى على حال واحدة. Yani to Allah it's the same. It's not like for human beings. Past is something that happened in the past to us and we struggle to remember what happened. The present is what you're experiencing now. The future is something you don't really know what's going to happen. To Allah it's all the same. He knows. This is the ilm of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's all as if it's like one state. It's one state. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ عَلِيمًا حَكِيمًا. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. That concludes ayah number 11. And inshallah ayah number 12 will begin next week inshallah at 7:30 inshallah. So please do join us at 7:30 sharp inshallah ta'ala. We'll open up the floor for any questions. As usual, we use Slido, sli.do, and the code is Tafseer, TAFSEER. We'll take any questions from the floor if there are any first. Yes, brother. Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
My cousin's got, he's a foster, he's got a child, young still, 4 years old,
Yeah.
English child. How will the inheritance work with that child? Because obviously he's not Muslim, he's got English name.
Yeah.
Foster system that you can't change the child.
Okay.
So even if the child becomes a Muslim later on,
Yeah.
would that maybe favor him in terms of inheritance?
So if it's a foster child, right, he's a foster child, and if he remains a non-Muslim, right, he can't inherit, and even if he became a Muslim, he can't inherit as an heir. However, he can bequeath some wealth, right? Like if he wants to give up to a third, he can do so, but no more than a third, and the rest would have to go to his heirs, basically his brothers and sisters and etc. Yeah. Wallahu a'lam. Yes.
If the wealth that you had an example around the non-Muslims around distributing wealth unfairly, what happens if that happens for Muslims but before death? What's the ruling on that? Is it better to the husband who benefited from it to distribute the wealth evenly
Yeah.
after death?
Yeah, so in a situation like after someone dies and the wealth hasn't been distributed according to Islamic law, upon knowledge of, because sometimes, a lot of the times, unfortunately, it's just due to ignorance. People don't know. Yeah.
It's not that, it's just before the death happened, they already distributed the wealth.
Ah, okay. Sorry. So they distributed the wealth before the person passed away. Was it in accordance to Islamic law? So if it wasn't according to Islamic law, then what they should do is put all the money back together in a pot and figure out who is entitled to what, right? And then distribute it accordingly. But also what you have to take into, when the wealth was given, was it right before death or a long time before death? Oh, now here we're to be careful. Here you have to be careful, because if it was given a long time before death, that's not technically inheritance. That's just a person giving his wealth away as a gift, which a person can do, right? And in that situation, obviously you are obliged to be fair. Like if you're, giving it to your children, splitting it between your children, you should be fair. But the rules of inheritance don't necessarily apply in that situation, because inheritance is after death, right? Inheritance is generally after death. So that's a slightly different scenario. Right. So when you say a long time before death, how? Couple of years. And what was the person's intention? Was it inheritance, or he just wanted to give his? Okay. I mean, that has to be investigated more, right? Inshallah. I mean, these things are sensitive, and you really ideally want to sit down with a person and go through the finer details. Inshallah. Yes. Alaikum assalam. Yeah.
And is it must or sad that I have to give that person, the sheikh who did it, to give some
From that inheritance? No. He's not entitled to that.
Where should
From your own pocket. Yeah, that from your own pocket. If you want to give it a gift to the sheikh for helping you to distribute the inheritance, yeah. I mean, you can give from your share. So if you received a share and you wanted to give him a gift for helping you, you can do so. That's not a problem. But he's not entitled to it, right? So you can't give him a share and then distribute it after that. right? So he has no haqq in that sense. But as a gift you can, and if it's from your own personal share, right? But you can't take it from somebody else's share without asking them. Yeah. Allahu Alam. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so an estate, a tarika, right, it's not just money. It's everything that is valuable is left behind. So a house, car, belongings, etc. of value, that is, should be all added to the estate. So if they left behind cash and a house, you have to look at the house. Right now, that house will have a value, right? So it might have to be sold and the cash be distributed to the heirs, or if they come to some sort of agreement between themselves, and if they want to maintain the house and keep the house, they can do so, right? So it's not a must. So if they come together, they might, and come to an agreement, they can do that as well. Right? Yeah. Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Well, it's a sin. If you don't follow the laws of the ahkam of inheritance, it's considered a sin without a shadow of a doubt. And if you do it intentionally, right, you're rebelling against Allah, right? And Allah mentions very clearly, وَتِلْكَ حُدُودُ اللَّهِ. These are the boundaries of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that whoever transgresses them has committed great dhulm, injustice. Wallahu a'lam. Yes. Barakallahu. So majority of the scholars say it is highly recommended, right, to write a will. In particular, if you become ill, right? So if you're ill and you think, oh, I could be dying, then it's highly emphasized for you to write a will, especially if you have huquq, meaning you owe people money, for example, and that there might be some wealth that is hidden and other people might not know about. So in that situation, it's highly, there was a minority of scholars who said it's wajib, right, for you to write a will in that situation. And there's a hadith that says no person should leave 2 or 3 days except that he has written a will. But majority of the scholars understood that to mean of a person who's on his deathbed, and it's an encouragement basically. So it's always good, without a shadow of a doubt. Yeah.
Some people, they have a secret wife, for example, with other children.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, this is a problem. I mean, firstly, having a secret wife is a problem. It's a problem, right? But if he had a secret wife and had children, right, it's his responsibility to clarify. Maybe he can write a will, and in his will, he can write, look, I have 2 wives and I have this amount of children, so split my inheritance according to Islamic law. No one has to read that. Well, khalas, he's moved on. He's gone. He doesn't have to face the fitna. Yes, this is his problem. Now, in my opinion, he should never have done this. Right? He should never have done this. If he knows he's going to create fitna, he should have resolved the problem before he passes away. That's the right thing to do. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That was abrogated, right? Al-aqrabun. Are you talking about al-aqrabun? Yeah. This rule has been abrogated. وَإِذَا حَضَرَ الْقِسْمَ أُولُو. So if at first in Islam, the ruling was that when the time came for the distribution of the tarika to be passed on to other people, it was a duty for him to give it to other people. And he give a bit to the yatama, give a bit to the poor, those who are, that the dead person might have been looking after. He might have looked after some orphans, for example. Give them a bit, right? That was first in Islam. But then this ayah was abrogated by the ayah of today. Let's take some questions here. That if a person, do you recommend every Muslim keep a will? So I've kind of answered that. Yes, it's good to keep a will, especially if you have a lot of wealth, especially if you owe people money, right? Especially if you fear that you will, you are ill, for example. That's even more emphasized, right? It is even more emphasized. If a person promised his daughters some of his wealth, but there was no will, after he passed away, does this wealth get distributed according to the Sharia? Yes. Right? And this is a big mistake that some people do, right? For example, this is very common in the Asian culture. What will happen is, before the mother passes away, she says, when I die, this daughter of mine will get this necklace, this daughter of mine will get this bracelet, this daughter of mine will get, this other set. Because, Asian women keep a lot of gold, isn't it? Right? You can't do that. If you want to give it before you die, like, you're alive, you're an old woman now, and you have no need for lots of gold, your husband has passed away, and so you say, okay, here, daughter, take this gold, keep it. That's not a problem, you can do that. But to say, as soon as I die, you can take this gold set, you can't do that. Because then that might make the distribution imbalanced. Because the daughters will be entitled to thuluthan. Right? Entitled, again, depending on the circumstances, but they'll be entitled to 2/3 of the inheritance. Right? And equally. So those 2/3, for example, right? If there were 3 daughters, they get it split equally. But if the necklace was worth a lot more than the ring, for example, it's not going to be fair like that. Yeah? So it has to be distributed. So that has to be basically ignored, and it has to be distributed according to Islamic law. Yeah. The inheritance laws are generally the same across the madhahib. There are finer masail in which there are differences of opinion. Yeah, but what we spoke about today is generally applies to all of the madhahib, right? And so that's one of the when it comes to inheritance, that's one of the. I suppose you can say the same with regard to many other things. Like when it comes to salah, there are many things that the scholars all agree upon. Like you have to do ruku', you have to do sujood, right? You have to say at-tahiyyat, you have to say al-fatiha, depending on, there are finer details there as well. But with inheritance, you could probably say there's probably more agreement in the rulings of inheritance than there are in many other chapters in fiqh. A question here, can a woman lead a shura as per the Hanbali madhab? Well, it's a very vague question, right? I don't know what you mean by shura. Do you mean in a political context? Do you mean just amongst yourselves? Right? Is it just amongst women? Is it amongst men and women? I don't know. You have to clarify. All right. Allahu Alam. Any final comments or questions? Otherwise we will wrap it up there. Yes, brother. Yeah. When an imam is praying, can you read the translation? When the imam is praying, your responsibility is really to listen to the imam. فَإِذَا قُرِئَ الْقُرْآنُ فَاسْتَمِعُوا لَهُ وَأَنصِتُوا. Allah says when the Quran is being recited, listen to it and keep quiet. So your duty is to listen. You have to listen, and you're not meant to read. You're not even meant to read the Arabic, to be honest. This is a mistake that you see people do in Taraweeh. In Taraweeh, the Imam will be reading and people bring out a mushaf and they read from the mushaf. Very common, isn't it? You see. Most scholars don't approve of this. Most scholars. They say this isn't correct. So if you can't even read the Arabic, you surely can't read the English. Yeah? My advice would be read the English beforehand, especially if it's like Taraweeh. Right? You know what's going to be recited. Read beforehand and prepare yourselves in that way. That's a better thing to do, inshallah. Wallahu ta'ala alam. And inshallah we will conclude next week, or resume next week, inshallah, 7:30 sharp. Jazakumullah khairan. Subhanaka wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.